Welcome to session 3, talking about chapter 3, being with God. Sam, in this chapter, you flesh out the 8 dimensions of being with, something you've done in other books before, but here doing it a little bit differently. Presence, attention, mystery, delight, participation, partnership, enjoyment, and glory. Can you tell us why you felt that being with needed further fleshing out, and how did you come to these in particular?
Perhaps I should say that these 3 chapters, I spent a lot of time angsting about how to structure the book.
Mm-hmm.
And what did people need to know before they really appreciated what I was really trying to do in the book? And I decided there were 3 things they needed to know: an overview chapter, chapter 1, something that said this is genuinely about, it's something that gave a sort of a whole sense that being with is already big picture Bible, and then something that rooted these 8 dimensions, which have become so foundational for me. But one thing I'd never done before, as I think you're hinting, is give a thoroughly scriptural account of the 8 dimensions. And so that's what I do in chapter 3. And I'm pretty happy with chapter 3, because when I read back through it, I think, it's like landing punches is a very aggressive metaphor, but in terms, it lands a lot of punches, I think, in terms of conveying the validity of these 8 dimensions. So clearly, for those who want to say everything comes out of exegesis of Isaiah 11, and we don't find these 8 words mentioned in Isaiah, I'm only picking that as a random passage.
Sure.
It's not that kind of thing. It's not that kind of thing. However, I think I do the best job I've ever done in this chapter of grounding them theologically in a way that makes them feel both truly descriptive and remarkably comprehensive. And those are the 2 things that I'm trying to do. I remember the afternoon sitting in my office in Duke Chapel in July 2011 when I wrote out the 8 dimensions, and it was 2 or 3 hours of really pondering as deeply as I can remember pondering, and playing around. In some ways, I wish I'd still got the piece of paper on which I scribbled and crossed out. But really, it came very easily, and I have never, for one day, lost confidence in the 8 dimensions. I mean, they do seem to do all the things I originally wanted them to do, but it was a great exercise to write this chapter because for those who want to show how everything is grounded scripturally rather than as a kind of inference from scripture, which is how I most often understand doctrine. I think I've achieved that. So in all modesty, I think it's added, as you say. I have described these 8 dimensions in lots of different ways in other books, but I don't think I'd ever kind of really pin them down exegetically from scripture, which I hope I've done a good job of doing here.
How do you think of them in relation to one another, the 8? I mean, is there a recommended? I want to see that piece of paper too, because I want to see, is it a list? Is it a concentric circles? Is that
No, it is a list.
Obviously, there can be overlap between them, but yeah, how do they exist in
So
relation to each other?
for example, incarnational ministry and incarnational mission, I do talk about a number of different scenarios, up to a dozen different scenarios, certainly 10, talking about each of the 8 dimensions, but by no means always in the same order. But the order is significant. I mean, very simply, presence is the one thing that everybody understands about being with, showing up. And almost everybody can grasp quite quickly the difference between simply showing up and then attention, which is saying there is nothing more important for me right now than being with you. Those are 2 parts that people grasp very, very easily. The other 6 dimensions need a bit more explanation. But I think, again, one of the most satisfying things about writing this book was that they became even more significant in a theological vein than they'd ever been in an ethical, missiological, pastoral vein before. And I didn't know that was going to happen. That was part of the risk of writing the book. but I feel at least as convicted about them. Not because that, I can, they're all there in the same passage of Revelation. It's not quite like that. But I think the job of a theologian is not simply to say this is what it says in Ephesians 2, but to say, standing a couple of steps back from the scripture and the tradition and using reason, this is what I think it kind of comes down to. Obviously, if you're going to go in for a list longer than 8, you're stretching people's capacity to remember and interact. But I was happy at the end of writing this chapter that I'd informed myself, which obviously is, well, for me is the first thing. I've got to be convinced. But it's just everywhere in Scripture that each of those 8 dimensions opens up a way of reading Scripture, for me it was illuminating.
We'll petition Duke Chapel for a plaque on the desk. This is where the Reverend Dr. Sam Wells created the 8 dimensions. Thank you. That's wonderful.